Chapter 6. Don't Judge, Lest You Be Judged. Surprise endings suggest a remedy for the evils of prejudice. How Harry Cast His Spell is not the English Major's Guide to Harry Potter. There actually is such a book, by the way. It's titled Unlocking Harry Potter, 5 Keys for the Serious Reader, and I recommend it to the literature geeks out there. This book lacks, consequently, discussions of narratological perspective, three-dimensional theme work, and the all-important influence of previous writers. By choosing to focus on the spiritual content of English literature, in which context the Harry Potter books have been written, to answer the question, whence Pottermania, I have had to leave out a lot of stuff. Which is, of course, as it should be. Buy a book on polar bears? You don't want to find out it's really a treatise on the geometry of Gothic cathedrals. I do, however, need to discuss the principal themes of the books. Their transcendent meaning that lights up our hearts and spirits is relatively self-evident. The trouble is keeping people in the room when you use the word themes. Briefly, here's how I decide if a book is a classic or not. My great book test has 3 parts. Does it address the big questions of human life? Does the artistry of the work support the answers given to these questions? And are the answers about edifying relationships with God, man, and the world? This last, in light of historic English literature being almost exclusively by Christians for other Christians, can be rephrased more simply, are the answers Christian? The Harry Potter books are classics, and not just as kid-lit, but as classics of world literature. The tales are masterfully told, at least in terms of how carefully the books and series have been structured, and they carry a motherlode of meaning, which brings us to what English teachers call themes. Themes are just the questions authors try to answer in story form. The larger the question, and the more important it is for us to understand the answer, is a decent gauge of whether the book is worth reading. We know the Potter books have been ingeniously plotted and are engaging enough to have sold more than 375 million copies. The subject for discussion, then, is what is in these beautiful, best-selling wheelbarrows. In them, we find the answer to 4 principal questions. How are we to treat one another? What is the answer to the mystery of death? When are we to embrace change or to flee change? What makes a human being good or bad or even human? Teachers give these questions theme titles like Pride and Prejudice, Death and Bereavement, Personal Transformation, and Choice. And these are the 4 overarching themes in the Harry Potter novels. In the next 3 chapters, I will look briefly at each before discussing the Christian meaning of Rowling's answer. Rowling has special sympathy for the victims of prejudice and ill treatment. Her favorite writers are Jane Austen and Charles Dickens, who champion the downtrodden and underdogs in every one of their books. Before her writing career took off, Rowling worked professionally on behalf of the helpless of Amnesty International, the worldwide advocacy arm and voice of political prisoners, and the unjustly persecuted and tortured everywhere. Closer to home, Rowling experienced the agony of losing friends who avoided her during the degenerative illness of her mother. She also endured the public shaming of single mothers during the Margaret Thatcher and John Mayer years. Since her success, her largest public gifts have been to causes supporting single mothers, those with AIDS, and the children of Eastern Europe via the Children's High-Level Group. Her heart and her money go to underdogs on the periphery of society. No surprise, then, to find out that prejudice, its cause, effect, and cure, is a primary focus on the Harry Potter novels. As is evident in the chart on page 56, every one of the Harry Potter books reveals a prejudice against another downtrodden group of people who are different from normal wizards or muggles in big ways and small. Rowling doesn't just lay out a black and white world where the good guys aren't racist and the bad guys are. Only Dumbledore seems free of prejudice. Hagrid doesn't trust foreigners or muggles, though he himself is hated by magical folk because he's a half-giant. Ron, despite his insecurities about being poor, has a host of wizarding prejudices, from giants to werewolves, though he only knows, and likes, one of each, and is always the first to point his finger at someone he doesn't like. Harry's age-old prejudice, as Lupin puts it, against Severus Snape and Draco Malfoy is his heroic flaw, and it is the only prejudice explored in Half-Blood Prince that prepares us for Harry's struggle in the final chapter. And the prisoners of prejudice, mostly the Slytherins, seem so unhappy in their sarcasm and meanness that they are more to be pitied than despised. What is remarkable about the magical world of Harry Potter, then, is not so much the incredible creatures, structures, and enchantments, as it is the fact that the wizards and witches are as unloving and self-important as the muggles many of them despise, and all patronize. Good thing the magic folk have an enlightened government and a free press to stand up for the oppressed. Ha! Pardon my sarcasm. The Daily Prophet is the television news and newspaper media conglomerate for wizards and witches. Every book chronicles the way it spreads half-truths and misinformation as gospel wisdom, hot off the press. In Goblet of Fire, though, we learn that these are not just the inevitable mistakes from rushing news to print. Meeting Rita Skeeter, star reporter for The Prophet and other wizarding publications, like The Witch Weekly for one, we realize that errors that might have been caused by incompetence or negligence are the result of plain and simple wickedness. Take a look at Rita's name for a clue as to what she's about. Rita equals read a, read a. Skeeter equals skeeto, like a mosquito, or blood-sucking, disease-carrying parasitical bug. And Rita is equal to her name. Rather than exposing the unjust and prejudiced in defense of the downtrodden, Miss Skeeter, an illegal beetlebug animagus, does everything she can to make life miserable for those in positions of responsibility or who are somehow different. She loves to create hardships for the ministry, of course, but saves her special venom for individuals she dislikes. In Goblet of Fire, she writes unflattering, unkind, and rude pieces, several of which she makes up whole cloth, about Dumbledore, Hagrid, Hermione, and Harry, who is misrepresented once and crucified another time on the morning of the last Triwizard Task. Thus, is the media in the magical world, I think we are meant to ask, unlike our own, is not about the life-supporting mission of exposing prejudice and uplifting those beaten down by it? As we learn in Order of the Phoenix, the newspaper instead actively and intentionally creates or fosters prejudice against individuals and groups in toadying service to the government. Cornelius Fudge wants Harry and Dumbledore discredited? The Daily Prophet is there to package the news daily for weeks on end, and on a different cue from the ministry, tells a story saying the complete opposite without a blush for the lies and distortions of the previous month. The reading public acts on cue from the Shadowcasters, and either attacks or passively agrees to thinking less of the misrepresented. Remember how Hermione is treated by Miss Weasley after the Witch Weekly article portrayed her as a Scarlet Woman? And Harry's reception at Hogwarts in Order of the Phoenix after a summer of innuendo that he is a braggart and show-off in need of attention? Even the good and wise have their opinion, made to order, and prejudices confirmed by the popular media. Only media-savvy Hermione figures out how to manipulate the system by having Harry's interview printed in the alternative press. The media in Harry Potter's world is key in attacking the downtrodden and furthering prejudice, just as often it is in our own world. The Ministry of Magic, MOM, one assumes from its initials, is supposed to be the protector of the helpless and a force for good against evil in the world. However, the ministry, I think we are again meant to ask, unlike our own government, is anything but maternal or heroic. Rowling consistently represents them as a gaggle of self-important airheads, busying themselves with laughable trivia, cauldron bottom reports, or international bread and circus functions like the Quidditch World Cup, while neglecting to take care of even their own. Just how long was Bertha Jorkins missing before the ministry sent out a search party? But the ministry is worse than bumbling and distracted. In Chamber of Secrets, in response to pressure and the need to appear active, Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge has Hagrid imprisoned in Azkaban, though he knows Hagrid is innocent. In Goblet of Fire, Sirius Black reveals that his life sentence in Azkaban was handed down just for the appearance of acting with strength. Stan Shunpike's imprisonment under the new law and order regime of Rufus Scrimmager in Half-Blood Prince shows the ministry has learned nothing about how to resist evil effectively. Azkaban is a psychic concentration camp where few survive. The ministry, it turns out, had been torturing those imprisoned in Azkaban through the guards, the Dementors, who lived by sucking everything good and beautiful from their souls. These guards return to Lord Voldemort's service on his return and are rapidly reproducing, as we learn in Half-Blood Prince, causing all of Britain to fall into a joyless depression. The name of the prison itself is a magical turn on Alcatraz and gulag-rich Soviet republics such as Uzbekistan. The ministry has its comic front, then but a gulag back. Ambitious ministers fiddle with inconsequential matters and act in response to pressure generated by the rich and the media. The ministry is incapable of passing the Muggle Protection Act or of policing wizards, practicing dark magic and Muggle baiting. Those who press for this sort of social good legislation are demoted for lacking real wizard pride, and beyond its failure to protect the innocents, In its nightmarish prison and zeal to incarcerate the innocent, the ministry becomes the agent of discrimination and persecution of the defenseless, the modern Orwellian regime with Mom's face. It is a great disappointment but little surprise when the minister of magic, in the dark hour at the end of Goblet of Fire, a time requiring decisiveness and courage to combat the risen Lord Voldemort, shows himself an impotent coward and fool. In a world ruled by prejudices and stereotypes, a world whose thoughts and feelings are guided by a self-serving media, and a world whose government maintains order by fear of torturous imprisonment, don't look for public figures of the stature of Winston Churchill. Order of the Phoenix is a dark novel, not because the bad guys are so bad, they are largely invisible, but because the supposed good guys have black hearts, which makes the life of the truly virtuous a catacomb nightmare. Though Fudge acknowledges in the Daily Prophet at the end of the Order of the Phoenix that the Dark Lord is back and the magical world is ready to oppose him, little has changed. The new Minister of Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour, whom we meet in Half-Blood Prince, is a get-tough politician who resembles Churchill in appearance, but who rearranges deck chairs while Albus Dumbledore is effectively researching and resisting Lord Voldemort. In Deathly Hallows, Lord Voldemort easily takes over the ministry by installing Pius Thickness as his puppet Minister of Magic, and the entire machinery of magical government serves his dark purposes openly. To show how low the ministry has gone, Rowling makes flushing toilets the point of entry for all ministry officials. Gone is the golden delusion visible in the Fountain of Magical Brethren, and the atrium of the ministry is filled with ebony stone statues of an enthroned witch and wizard over the statement, "Magic is might." These are kids' books? Hardly. The message of Harry Potter is clear. Poisonous prejudice is everywhere, and only constant vigilance and resistance to the regime of ideas, whose government and media authorities foster and codify this hatred, will free us of it. The Harry Potter books encourage readers to take a step back from the world and recognize what an unloving place it is. This stepping back to appreciate the satirical picture of our world drawn in story is the first step necessary to any spiritual life. The ladder of divine ascent in every revealed tradition requires recognizing the fallen world for what it is, and in Christian language, deciding to be in the world but not of the world. See John chapter 17, verses 13 through 16. Look again at the chart listing the prejudices of the wizarding world and the persecuted individuals and groups who live there. Only in Order of the Phoenix do we learn, in the House of Black looking at the Black family tapestry, how inbred and insular the leading magical families have become over the generations, and how far their narrow belief in eugenics or good breeding to overcome the world's ills had taken them. That is, into the Dark Lord's service. We can see this same thinking reflected in modern society. It is responsible for the Soviet gulags, Nazi camps, and abortion clinics. And it's the same thinking that continues to drive our culture of death, like euthanasia, abortion, self-sterilization, etc. But why do we get so much out of hearing such a difficult message in the pages of Rowling's Harry Potter novels? Adult and child readers, who rarely read 800-page novels, are reading the 4,100 pages of these 7 novels repeatedly. And I mean again and again and again. There has to be a reason such a painful message about our times is much more than reader-friendly. I think there are 2 reasons. First, the hook. Nothing is worse than being preached at in a novel. Okay, there are a lot of things worse than that, but among reading headaches, a writer on a philosophical or theological hobby horse is way up there. Rowling lulls one almost to sleep with all the persecuted groups and individuals with double natures, and how wicked she makes the bad guys. Yawn. The good guys are the victims of prejudice. The bad guys are all proud and prejudiced. What's to keep one awake? The revelation to come is that we readers are the prejudiced ones. Every Potter novel ends with an Agatha Christie surprise. These surprise endings make the dullest reader slap himself on the forehead and say, "Duh, what was I thinking? I should have known that bad guy was a good guy. Why was I so sure he was a bad apple?" This gives Rowling's prejudice theme a 3rd dimension, the dimension above the page, and in your heart. It's one thing to hate Draco along with Harry and his gang because of the Nazi-like snobbery. It's another thing entirely to learn that you're as bad as Draco for having assumed that the bad guy was good and the good guy was bad, which Rowling tricks us into doing in almost every book, and especially in Half-Blood Prince. in which we are tricked into believing Severus Snape is a murderer, and once again that Albus Dumbledore is only an angel, and Harry's guardian angel at that. The second reason we respond to the agonizing problem of prejudice in the world is more to the point. We read and reread the books because they offer the right answer. The answer is love. Prejudice or a rush to judgment is a failure in love. We recognize in these stories the desire to see what makes us feel best about ourselves, even if it means being unkind or dismissive of others. The Sorting Hat, Hermione, and Dumbledore all make pleas in Order of the Phoenix for students to overlook their differences for the greater good. Pleas for love which mostly fall on deaf ears. Though it has prevented him from being the Dumbledore man he imagines himself to be, Harry's hatred for Severus Snape, his prejudice, is what largely defines him at the end of Half-Blood Prince. Harry's ability to defeat the Dark Lord in Deathly Hallows, of course, is consequent to his learning and accepting that it was Severus's love for and loyalty to Harry's mother, Lily, that kept him alive all these years. Confronted by his core prejudice, Harry is able to sacrifice himself in love for his friends because he has the darkness within himself. That love as the solution to prejudice so dominates the storyline of a book written in a tradition of Christian literature should not be a surprise. Love is supposed to be the defining mark of Christians. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples. See John chapter 13, verse 35. One of the few explicit commandments given by Christ to his followers is the love of God and neighbor. See Mark chapter 12, verse 30 through 31. Another commandment, really an application of the commandment to love, is the prohibition against judging our brother's sins. See Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. This is not a prohibition of discernment and virtuous discrimination, but the warning against identifying our neighbor by his sins and the pretense of being without sin ourselves. Just as the sacrificial love and spiritual mindedness of the God-man was the answer to the twin riddle, so Christ is also the answer to the prejudice nightmare. Christ is love himself, and as much as he lives in our heart, like him we stand with the underdogs of society, resist the Pharisees and forces of this world, and are called to love others as ourselves. That is, unconditionally and sacrificially. Christ never conformed to the prejudices of his times or shrank to being a respecter of persons or position. His disciples are called to a no less heroic position, and the Harry Potter books, in their satire of worldly institutions and exposure of our own rush to judge and condemn, point to this selfless life of love. But being against prejudice and for love is a little bit like being against drunk driving. Christians are against drunk driving, but so are sentimental nihilists and Christian baiting communists. In the theme and treatment of death, and in the means to transcend death, the Potter books move from implicit support of the Christian understanding of the world to almost explicit statements of doctrine.